Hey, it's Ralph. Welcome to the update this week on my VR game. This week is going to be a bit different. The reason being that I don't have any updates on my game, which is kind of a worst case scenario, and I have been trying to figure out how to make my video this week without anything to show. So I'm going to try to ramble a bit about my VR game or about VR game dev in general, and yeah, let's see how that goes. First of all, a bit about me. I am working full-time on this VR game, or at least I try to do it full-time as much as I can, but I'm also a freelance programmer, which means sometimes I do have to do other stuff in order to pay the bills. Obviously, though, I try to do as much as I can on the VR game side of things. I'm really committed to this project. I want to finish it. I'm mostly motivated. There are days where I'm not that much motivated, but in general, I'm quite excited. I have been following the VR kind of news and headsets and all that stuff since 2012. So I always wanted to do a VR game, but I had to wait a long time to actually do it. Now I think it's like the perfect time for me to do this. I have made games previously. I'm not a total newbie in terms of Unity. I worked with Unity ever since I finished college. I did my final thesis in Unity 3D. And yeah, I'm trying to hopefully become a Unity professional. I don't know whether I would call myself a Unity professional already, because even after like 4 years working with Unity, there's still so much to learn. I mean, it's such a complex program. Game development in general is quite complex, and at the moment I'm doing all of it. I hopefully in the future I can do it with other people. But for now I am working on the game myself, and I'm quite used to that. I can do most of the stuff. I'm quite passionate about the music. My weakest point is probably the visual kind of side of it. With 3D modeling, I started really late. I began with doing the programming stuff ever since I was like maybe 13 years old. So yeah, now I'm going to talk a bit about my game in general. What are my thoughts? What goes through my mind? What is the goal with the game? To be honest, it's still like this unknown territory I'm currently in. But it's also exciting, even though I sometimes hope that I get a much more clearer picture in the future. In terms of music, I'm going to do a bit of ambient music, which is my favorite music style. I like to do also some live recordings, not just of instruments, maybe even going outside or recording my own computer. Computer sounds are usually noisy, and I think noise in general is something I'm going to explore much more. In general, I think the music, or if you want to say the sound of the game, is going to be quite experimental. At least that's going to be my approach for the next week, to hopefully find some time. I will definitely find some time next week to do more experimentation on the musical and visual side. Speaking about the visuals of the game, I'm also quite excited by generative art. Generative art is a kind of a programming art style. You program certain algorithms and rules, which are usually quite easy rules. It could be, for example, something like draw a line and then draw two other lines perpendicular to this line, and then just keep going with a lot of iteration. And what comes out at the end is usually something quite complex. And yeah, that's kind of the thing I want to also experiment with. What you can do there is doing some textures, or even level design and procedural meshes, which are basically the whole art of the game is done via algorithms and not in the Blender, for example. Generally, though, I want to keep the game quite minimalistic. That's a tendency I want to go with my art in general, with music. That has been a step for me over the past few years, because when you start out doing music or visual arts, you always try to add more, make it more, and actually leaving stuff out, I have learned over the past few years, is a much more difficult thing, because you really have to think about the individual elements and make them really good, and not just adding stuff after stuff and yeah, losing kind of your direction. Another thing I want to explore with the game is fractals. Fractals really are usually thought of as a visual kind of thing, but what I think is really cool about fractals is that they enable you to make stuff seem less man-made and more organic and natural, which is something I want to really have in the game, which is kind of interesting, which probably brings us to the topic of what is the game about, or what will be the central theme of the game. If you think about being inside of a computer or in cyberspace, you think about some kind of mechanical stuff. It's all man-made, and it's quite of a contrast compared to, for example, if you are in nature or if you are in the woods. It's all organic, nothing is man-made. And I want to explore this kind of contradiction between these man-made structures that are non-organic and usually have right angles and sharp edges, and in nature you don't have any of that. And to me, this is a really interesting topic I want to explore in terms of the central aspect of the game. The last thing I want to talk about is the level design. Pacing is something really essential. I also watched the Tron movie this week again. I think the last time I watched the Tron movie was when I was like, I don't know, 12 years old or something like that. And watching it again was quite interesting. I noticed after watching so many other movies how kind of dated it is, the original Tron movie. I have not watched the new one. Visuals are still today quite revolutionary. If you think about back then, it was like really cool stuff in 1982, and the progression, the pacing, which is something you can also think about in terms of level design, was a bit lacking, and yeah, it doesn't hold up any much these days. Maybe not even back then, but back then when I watched it, I was a little kid, so maybe that's something that is different when you kind of are not a kid anymore. I want to have the game a mixture between a skill-based kind of game mechanic and a puzzle game mechanic. I don't want to necessarily make it a puzzle game. There will be some puzzle aspects to the game, but generally it's about timing based. The music, you need to time your throws and your catches and the bouncing of the disc, and this will be quite central to the gameplay, but there's so much other things. I wrote down like a whole list of stuff I want to integrate into the game. Maybe in another video I will talk a bit more about that. My general plan for the game is to release it by the end of the year, which means, well, there's not a lot of time left now. So I really have to kind of shift up my gears and really see that I make much more progress in terms of level design and making the levels themselves and not focusing too much on the visual side of things. I want to not just make a game that has a cool mechanic, I want to really make a stylized visual kind of thing, maybe evoking some kind of emotions. You know, I don't want to make it like mechanical. I mean, the mechanical part of the game is definitely important, but I also want to have it kind of a human story, if you want to call it that. There is not going to be an elaborate story, but in terms of visuals and mood, I want to make it really interesting and evoke some emotions in the player. Yeah, that's it pretty much for this week. I hope you enjoyed the videos anyway. I mean, these kinds of weeks will happen again, probably. I will try to reduce it as much as I can. Next week I will definitely be back with updates of the game, and yeah, thank you for watching, and if you like the video, please leave a like and maybe subscribe. That would also be cool. So then, yeah, see you next week. Bye bye. What am I talking about?